One Piece used to be much more simple compared to how grandiose the series has grown in the modern day. As the series entered its final saga, the stakes have never been higher as everything is focused on capturing the One Piece and revealing the ever-looming Void Century. The most powerful crews and individuals in the New World are vying for control, the Elder Stars and Imu are becoming more prominent, and Luffy has risen to the rank of Yonko. As all of these powerful factions close in on the One Piece, the numerous weaving threads and story elements involved continue to grow in number and complexity. With the reveal of Roxy Zebek and more information from the past being revealed, more light is being shed on some of One Piece's longest-standing mysteries. But before Yonko split the sky, islands were being wiped off the map, and yokai-like monsters confronted the Straw Hats, there was a time when One Piece was a much more simple and focused story. One that, while it still had plenty of moving parts, its scope wasn't as grand as it is today. Luffy has changed a lot as he first popped out of that barrel and onto our screens. Back then, he was just a rubber boy seeking to assemble a crew of pirates. Early One Piece was much more simple, and that simplicity made the series incredibly charming. That's why today, I want to explore why early One Piece was so charming, and why so many people look back on it so fondly, despite how much the series has changed in over 25 years. When you think early One Piece, you probably think the East Blue Saga. Well, one of the integral contributors that made early One Piece more simple is that it was confined to just one aspect of the world. The One Piece world is extremely vast, as it's made up of numerous oceans which house places like Fishman Island, the Sky Islands, the Four Blues, the Grand Line, and the New World. We have seen numerous locations across Luffy's journey, and an integral part of following Luffy on his journey is him discovering fun and mysterious new places. But the East Blue, while with its own adventures to be had, was much more confined and limited in the locations to visit and mysteries to unravel. It was but one small part of the grander One Piece world. It was just one of the Four Blues, which they themselves only make up a certain portion of the planet. With each new vast area of the world, it was marked as a significant turning point in the story and Luffy's journey overall. Oda did a great job presenting this from the very beginning of the series. It was established early on that the East Blue was just a blip on the radar of the adventure that was to come. The true mysteries, adventures, and dangers awaited in the Grand Line, where more powerful pirates resided, leading to even more possibilities. That was why the Straw Hats going to Reverse Mountain and entering the Grand Line was such a significant turning point in the story. It was essentially Oda telling the reader that everything you've seen up until now is just a taste of what's to come. This same feeling was conveyed again within the New World, another portion of the One Piece world where the most integral mysteries and most powerful individuals resided. The time skip came with the Straw Hats first entering the New World after Fishman Island. It was a turning point in the story. But being confined to the East Blue, we were oblivious to just how vast this world truly is. As Luffy ventured throughout the East Blue, we experienced it through his perspective as it was his first time seeing these new locations as well as ours. Luffy, as well as the reader, didn't know what was to come, but Luffy being ever one for adventure made something as simple as sailing around the East Blue a grand adventure in and of itself. But Oda could only do so many things with those restrictions. The locations couldn't be as weird and quirky, villains couldn't be as deep and as powerful, and the true mysteries, such as the Void Century, lay within the Grand Line. The East Blue was limited on what it could offer, so Oda chose to slowly introduce different aspects of the One Piece world that would become vital later on through small tastes in the East Blue. We'll learn about the Marines and their battles against pirates, and how even corruption plagued smaller divisions within the group, such as with them ignoring the Arlong situation for so many years. We were introduced to Devil Fruits and how unique and wacky they could be, but also just how rare they are in the more normal locations of the One Piece world. Everywhere Luffy ventured, people were shocked to see a rubber boy who could stretch. Some within the One Piece universe weren't sure even if Devil Fruits were real, which made it extremely easy for Luffy to catch these average citizens off guard. We only saw but a handful of Devil Fruits, such as Luffy and Buggies. They were very scarce, but once the Straw Hats entered the Grand Line, Devil Fruits were the norm amongst many pirates, as it was those abilities that made them fearsome enough to brave the more dangerous parts of the One Piece world beyond just the likes of East Blue. A Devil Fruit gave Luffy a fundamental advantage in the East Blue, but that was no longer the case in the Grand Line. Locations were also more simple. While today we are accustomed to wacky and unique locations such as Punk Hazard, Whole Cake Island, and Fishman Island, during the days of the East Blue, locations were more normal, which is quite rare by One Piece standards. Islands in the Grand Line were often characterized by some special attributes, but many of the lands seen in the East Blue were normal by comparison. When Luffy went to a new location, it wasn't done through a carefully charted path using a log pose or having to brave serious dangers to get there. The seas were calmer and the locations safer, for the most part. Orangetown, Syrup Village, and even Kokiyashi Village, while hindered by criminals, were for the most part just normal locations. Adventure. With less complex narratives and mysteries to implement at this point in the story, Oda made the East Blue a place of adventure while providing little tidbits of the more serious stuff to come. This adventure was presented through the idea of Luffy assembling his crew. Each location was presented with the intent to set up characters who would become an integral part of the story to come. Experiencing the adventure that led to the introduction of these iconic characters contributes to early One Piece feeling so very different. It was a time of laying the groundwork for the grander planned narrative in the series. To reach that point, Oda first had to establish his world and his cast. We were introduced to Shanks in Chapter 1, and its importance to Luffy played a key part in his character. Looking back, we were introduced to an extremely important figure in a Yonko in the very first chapter of the series. But back then, we knew very little of just how important Shanks would actually be and how reserved his appearances would become. We learned the kind of person Luffy was by who he wanted on his crew and what he would do for them. His meeting with Zoro established him officially becoming a captain to someone else, while also introducing the Marines, a faction that remains a vital component of the One Piece world even today. Through the likes of Syrup Village and Orangetown, we were introduced to the bad side of piracy and how some pirates, even relatively weaker ones, could cause misery for the average person. These encounters yielded something more than Luffy just defeating a villain, but making progress in assembling his crew. Barodier taught us more about the dangers waiting within the Grand Line, and just how strong individuals in this world could be with the introduction of Mihawk, who himself heralded the first exposure to the Seven Warlords, a group of individuals who would play key components in the story even into the New World. The Arlong Park arc was our first true insight into just how dark the One Piece world could be. It was this very arc that made so many people fall in love with the series after all. And while the East Blue had some darker undertones, it was mostly a more lighthearted adventure, but it escalated throughout the saga, culminating in Nami's character arc. The adventure led Luffy to finding someone vital for his future plans with a skilled navigator like Nami. In addition, we learned more about the Fishman and more races of the One Piece world, which would escalate into the Grand Line. This adventure through the East Blue is the foundation of the Straw Hat Pirates. The original five hold a special place as they are essentially the founding members of the crew, who all came together while the crew had still yet to gain true notoriety. Each of them being recruited also came with small character arcs establishing their core character traits that would define them for the series to come. If the Straw Hat had just come together without some events to make us want to get invested into their characters and adventure, it'd make us less interested in them overall in the future stories to come. Luffy saving Nami, Zoro's clash with Mihawk, Sanji's farewell to Zeph, it was these kind of emotional character moments that would come to define One Piece, and that made us want to get invested in where these characters would go and how they were going to grow. This portion of the series naturally came with less mystery and overarching plots. As soon as we entered the Grand Line, we eventually entered the first main saga there, the Alabasta saga, which included Crocodile, the Seven Warlords, and the Poneglyphs, objects that held great mystery in the One Piece world and the Void Century. But these concepts didn't yet exist in the East Blue to us. The power system of the world was yet to be expanded upon even. Modern One Piece is driven by mastery of Haki. It's what's enabled Luffy's growth within the New World. But during the East Blue, the closest idea we had of Haki was Shanks carrying that Sea King in the beginning. But how he would become a fundamental part of One Piece's power system was still hundreds of chapters away. The East Blue was driven by more simple conflict, with the likes of Luffy being reliant on his Devil Fruit. No observation or armament Haki to speak of. We didn't know about Laugh Tale and how complex getting there truly was. Roger was but a character who loomed over the series with no info about who the man truly was. The Will of D was in its early stages of being revealed as one of the great mysteries in the series. Back then, it was just Luffy's middle initial, but today that very initial carries heavy meaning. The plots of the East Blue were also more character-driven by each of the individual Straw Hats. Nami's suffering at the hands of Arlong, and Zoro's drive to become the strongest swordsman that showed us just how devoted he was in his loss to Mihawk. These character moments and arcs showed us just what kind of series One Piece truly was. It was these character arcs and moments that gave the East Blue saga enough substance to tell a compelling narrative, despite not having its grandiose narratives that would come later in the series. These arcs weren't displayed with greater narratives driving them, such as Wano, where the secrets of Odin, time travel, and the complex tyranny of Orochi and Kaido gave enough substance to make it the series' longest arc. These were short arcs meant to tell less complex stories, and that itself can be very charming, as individual characters and their motivations can easily get lost in the greater One Piece narratives currently unwinding. Today, One Piece is a sprawling cast that it can be challenging to keep up with them all. We will often go years without seeing some characters. People often call for more individual moments for the Straw Hats themselves, but with a cast as vast as One Piece's, despite how talented a writer Oda may be, he won't always be able to give every character the spotlight. Some will have to take the back seat. Not all Straw Hats can be as important as the likes of Zoro or Robin. Take Usopp for example. Usopp just doesn't command the story's significance as someone like Robin does. She is the key to reaching Laugh Tale for Luffy. Luffy can have the strongest crew members and most skilled navigators such as Zoro and Nami, but without being able to decipher the Poneglyphs, it's all pointless. That makes Robin significant and more prone to exposure. But in East Blue, this core cast was only 5 characters in one location. Usopp could get more exposure even in arcs like Arlong Park, where there was less for Oda to keep up with and present to the story. One Piece's vast world and cast is one of the things that makes it so great, but that very fact is what makes a short portion of the story where things weren't so grandiose very special. It was a time when people could see more direct exposure to their favorite characters. It was a smaller cast when the Straw Hats didn't need to compete with each other for screen time or things to do. These more simple plot elements and stories, along with the vintage art style of old anime, give early One Piece a very charming feel. A point in the series where things were more simple, the story was more driven by adventure and characters as the grander narratives had yet to be implemented. The Ace Blue Saga may not reach the height and significance of arcs that would come later, but it played an integral part in making One Piece the juggernaut it is today. It served as the perfect introduction to the One Piece world, giving us stellar introductions to the types of concepts and characters that make this world so unique. But it also laid the groundwork for the more intense and important stories that were to come. Without the East Blue to pave the way, future significant moments in the story may not have paid off quite as well. But most importantly, it greatly established Luffy as the main character of the series. It made very clear what his main objectives were to gather a crew and become the Pirate King. It showed us the kind of person he was and just how far he would go for others that he cares about, and just how far he's willing to go to achieve his goals and dreams. The key character traits that define Luffy as a character in the modern day were established all the way back then, which made us want to follow this character for decades to come. But what do you think of early One Piece? Do you find it as special and as charming as other people do? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you made it this far, thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button as it helps the video grow, it helps the channel grow. My name is Shepazard, thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.